When I first saw a random teenager joyriding my boat in circles around the marina, shirtless and waving a Monster Energy can like he'd just won the Indy 500, I assumed I'd stumbled into someone else's family drama. Maybe some overindulgent uncle let the kid take a spin. Maybe he'd borrowed it without asking. What I didn't assume, what no sane person would assume, is that this smug, sunburned adolescent had just been gifted my $70,000 wake boat by a woman who'd never so much as said hello to me before. A woman who, I'd later find out, thought HOA board status made her queen of all visible property, including mine. I stood there on the dock with my sandwich still in hand, staring at the wake churned up around my slip. The boat was unmistakably mine. Custom hull wrap. Upgraded audio system. That obnoxious, oversized orange bimini top I'd chosen for maximum shade and maximum spite against Karen, who once filed a noise complaint when I used a hammer on a Sunday afternoon. And now it was gone. Floating 15 feet offshore, full of screaming teenagers, one of whom was flipping me off while pretending to steer with his feet. The security guard who patrolled the dock during weekends and yacht club events wandered over. He gave me the kind of look people give when they think you're about to start yelling. I didn't. I just asked him, calmly, why a bunch of kids were using my boat. Oh, that's Mitchell, he said, squinting toward the boat. Karen said he could use it. Something about it being a community resource. That's when I felt something sharp twist in my gut. Not anger, yet, but that slow, rising disbelief you feel when reality starts skipping like a scratched CD. Community resource? Like my boat was a picnic table? I spent the next 30 minutes calling the police, who told me, predictably, it was a civil matter unless I could prove it was stolen. Then I walked straight to the HOA clubhouse, where Karen was holding court like a suburban Caesar. Her throne, a beige leather office chair with lumbar support. Her scepter, a tall cup of iced coffee and a printout of the HOA charter. I knocked once, then walked in without waiting. Oh, you can't just barge in here, she said, clutching her pearls. Okay, not literally pearls, but a chunky necklace that looked like it had been stolen from a home goods lamp. Karen, I said, calm as a surgeon, your son is currently operating my boat like it's a carnival ride. She blinked like I'd accused her of arson. That's not your boat, she said, as if that settled the matter. It's on HOA property, and per Section B, subsection 4, anything moored longer than 30 days is considered common use unless specifically registered with the... It's registered in 3 places, I interrupted. The marina, the state, and with the Department of Wildlife. Want the registration numbers? I've got them on my phone. Well then, she said, smiling tightly, I suppose we'll let the courts decide. She said it like she'd just won something. Like she believed her laminated charter carried more legal weight than my state-issued title. I left without another word. Here's the thing, I don't lose my temper. I don't throw tantrums. But I also don't lose. And what Karen didn't know is that she'd just poked a very patient, very methodical bear. One who owns a drone, has an uncle in shipping logistics, and keeps every receipt since 2009 filed in color-coded folders. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to sink her from the inside out. First, I spent 2 days gathering footage. Security cameras, drone overhead shots, even screenshots from Mitchell's own Instagram story, which he'd foolishly titled Boat Day with Mom's Gift. It was a goldmine. Every dumb, self-incriminating clip of him popping Red Bulls on the stern and bragging about his new toy would be burned into evidence. Then I filed a police report, not just for theft, but for unauthorized use of registered property and illegal operation of a motor vehicle without a license. Mitchell was 16. The boat had a 400-horsepower engine. Karen responded the way you'd expect. She threatened to sue me for harassment. She even tried to rally the HOA board against me, claiming I was an aggressive, emotionally unstable man harassing a single mother doing her best. Which was funny, considering her husband ran a car dealership 5 miles away and spent most weekends playing golf at a private club. I smiled through all of it. I showed up to the emergency HOA meeting with a manila folder an inch thick and waited quietly while Karen ranted about safety and neighborhood unity. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just handed out copies. Drone images, registration documents, video transcripts, screenshots of texts between her and Mitchell where she literally wrote, "Just take it out, he won't notice." You could hear the air hiss out of the room like a balloon deflating. And that should have been the end of it. Any sane person would have backed down, issued an apology, maybe even offered to pay for detailing. But not Karen. No, Karen doubled down. She told the board I was weaponizing paperwork, and accused me of hacking her son's phone. The next morning, my boat was gone again. This time, she had moved it. Not just out of the slip, but off the property entirely. The security guard said she'd hired a private towing company to remove it as an eyesore, and when I called that company, they told me it had been sold to cover impound fees. Sold. My boat. In less than 24 hours. No notice, no chance to reclaim it. It was gone. But remember that uncle I mentioned? The one in shipping? Turns out the buyer who picked up my boat had hired his company, pure coincidence, to transport it down the coast. I called in a favor. By the time Karen smugly posted on Facebook that she hoped I'd learn to share like a good neighbor, my boat was already being craned onto a cargo vessel bound for Veracruz. She didn't know it yet, but she just triggered something much bigger than a neighborhood squabble. Because now it wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure that woman never touched anything that wasn't hers again. And the next move? That would make the last ones look like a warm-up act. Karen found out about the boat's disappearance 3 days later, at her own pool party, no less. She'd invited half the HOA to what she'd dubbed a casual lakefront mixer, complete with tiki torches, catered shrimp, and a portable margarita machine that never worked quite right. I wasn't invited, of course, but I didn't need to be. One of the board members, Dennis, a man with the spine of a jellyfish but the conscience of a golden retriever, texted me play-by-play updates out of sheer moral panic. At 3:37 p.m., he sent, "Karen asking where the boat is. Mitchell freaking out. At 3:40, she's blaming you again. Says you're probably hiding it in your garage?" And then, the masterpiece at 3:45, "She's calling the Coast Guard?" I actually laughed when I read that one. Picture this. Karen, in a sun hat large enough to block out a solar flare, pacing around her backyard shrieking into a phone about a missing vessel, as if she were Captain Phillips. I could have sent her a picture of the boat being offloaded in Mexico, custom wrap still pristine, bimini top folded neatly like the corner of a fresh hospital bed, but that would have been too easy. I wanted her to stew. I wanted her to go through the same confusing panic I'd felt that first day at the dock, staring at a wake where my property used to be. Instead, I did something much worse. I mailed her a receipt. Not a threatening letter, not a warning. Just a scanned copy of the International Shipping Manifest with her address labeled as the previous domestic custody contact. No return name. Just that, tucked inside a blank envelope. I imagine she opened it over her morning coffee and slowly felt her heart rate rise like a thermometer in a microwave. 2 days later, she tried to file a stolen property claim with the very same officer who had originally dismissed my report as a civil dispute. This time, the tables had turned. Not only did the officer remember her, but I had already preemptively delivered my own documentation package the night before, complete with notarized ownership records and GPS logs of the boat's last known path. The officer reportedly told her, "Ma'am, you can't steal something, sell it, then report it missing." According to Dennis, she left the precinct looking like someone had replaced her margarita mix with pickle brine. By this point, Mitchell had apparently started skipping school out of embarrassment. One of the teachers I knew said he'd heard other kids calling him Senor Boat Boy. Karen, of course, blamed me for the targeted emotional trauma. She showed up on my property the next weekend, stomping across the lawn in white sandals and a fury so intense I could practically hear it sizzling. "You think this is funny?" she snapped the moment I stepped outside. "You think it's cute to destroy a young man's summer over some boat?" "Destroy," I said, sipping my lemonade. "You gave it away. I just made sure it got where it was going." She got in my face then, too close for comfort, her perfume a choking cloud of cucumber melon rage. "You're going to pay for this. You've humiliated my family. My son had dreams of a watersports scholarship." "From stealing boats?" I asked. "That's an interesting recruitment pipeline." That's when she went for the kill shot. "Fine. You want to play games? I'll see you in court." That should have scared me. Normal people panic when lawsuits come into play. But I knew something Karen didn't. I knew her HOA budget. Not just a rough idea, I knew it line by line. I'd read the bylaws when I moved in, the amendments when they were revised, even the shady emergency meeting minutes that had mysteriously vanished from the website but still lived in cached Google files. So when she mentioned court, I smiled. Because if she wanted a war of attrition, I was perfectly stocked for siege. The next week, I filed a counterclaim: civil theft, malicious property transfer, and defamation. I didn't ask for money. I asked for something better: her HOA seat. If she lost, she would be required to vacate her board position and attend a community vote on whether she should be barred from future elections. And if she tried to duck it, I had an entire community worth of evidence ready to fly. In the days that followed, the neighborhood split like an overripe peach. On one side were the old guard Karen loyalists, the people who'd drunk the Kool-Aid long ago and now called it wine. On the other, the silent majority who'd endured years of her micromanaging tyranny and now saw their chance. Flyers started appearing on mailboxes. I didn't print them, but I certainly didn't stop them. They read things like, "Karen doesn't own the lake or your boat, and vote for sanity, not HOA royalty." The day of the court hearing felt like a school assembly hosted inside a courtroom. Half the neighborhood showed up. Karen wore a stiff, beige suit that made her look like she was running for PTA president in a retirement village. Mitchell slouched behind her in a hoodie with the hood cinched so tight he looked like a human drawstring bag. I wore jeans and a button-down and brought 2 thick binders. One for the judge, and one for the inevitable moment Karen would accuse me of forging everything. She tried. Oh, how she tried. She said I'd intimidated her. Said I'd used techno-manipulation, her actual words, to trick her son. Said I had coordinated a neighborhood propaganda campaign to erode her trust and safety. I said, "Your Honor, I just mailed her a receipt." The judge, a man who looked exactly like the sort of person who built his own deck and didn't suffer fools, asked one question: "Did you authorize your son to take the boat?" Karen hesitated. I encouraged him to make use of community resources. The judge nodded. "So, you encouraged him to take something that legally wasn't his, and then had it sold?" "I was protecting the neighborhood from an abandoned eyesore," she snapped. "By selling it and keeping the money?" he asked. That's when she crumbled. And by crumbled, I mean she started blaming everyone. Mitchell, me, the board, the marina, even the shipping company. The more she spoke, the worse it got. The judge didn't even need to deliberate. He ruled in my favor on all counts. By the time we walked out, Karen was ashen. Not just because of the loss, but because the judge had ordered her to pay court costs. She also had to formally apologize during the next HOA meeting and vacate her position immediately. And Mitchell? He was ordered to complete 30 hours of community service at the marina. He now picks up litter next to the dock where my new, slightly better boat is parked. But I wasn't done. I had one more card to play, one I'd been saving for maximum burn. And it involved Karen's husband, 3 undeclared invoices, and a boat dealership audit that was about to make her life way more interesting. The apology was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, but Karen tried to weasel out of it with a last-minute doctor's note. A conveniently vague email arrived an hour before the meeting stating she was under extreme emotional distress and would be unable to participate in hostile public events due to hypertension concerns. Unfortunately for her, the court order didn't care about her blood pressure. The judge had mandated the apology be public, verbal, and delivered during a full HOA meeting with at least 50% attendance. No substitutions, no proxies, no ducking out with a sob story and a scented excuse. So, she showed up. Barely. She looked like someone had scraped her off a baking sheet, overdressed for sympathy in a neck brace she hadn't worn at the court hearing, oversized sunglasses indoors, and a trembling hand holding a note card with her apology printed in 36-point font. I think she was hoping the theatrics would win her some pity. It didn't. The room was packed. Dennis stood near the back, recording on his phone. Someone had brought popcorn. A few kids sat cross-legged near the front, watching like it was a school play. Karen cleared her throat dramatically and began. I would like to formally apologize, she read, pausing for emphasis, for any misunderstanding that occurred regarding the use of the community dock and watercraft resources. A groan rippled through the audience. I raised my hand. Ma'am, the court specifically said your apology had to acknowledge fault. She tightened her jaw like she was chewing nails. Fine, she snapped, flipping the card over. I am sorry I encouraged my son to use a boat that did not legally belong to us. I made assumptions based on outdated HOA guidelines and failed to verify ownership before acting. I also regret selling the aforementioned boat without due process. Say his name, someone in the back yelled. It might have been Dennis. Say whose boat it was. Karen blinked, stunned. For a second, I thought she'd fake faint. Instead, she mumbled, "It belonged to Mr. Carter." "Louder, please," I said, doing my best not to smirk. She said it again, louder this time, voice brittle with forced civility. "It belonged to Mr. Carter." "And do you acknowledge you stole it?" I asked. The silence was surgical. Karen stared at me like I'd asked her to eat a live pigeon. "I acknowledge that I took unauthorized possession," she muttered. "Close enough." The board accepted the apology. The crowd applauded. Karen turned and marched out, sunglasses still on despite the setting sun. Her exit would have been more powerful if she hadn't tripped over the microphone cable on the way. Most people would have left it there. But I'm not most people. Karen had taken something from me, something valuable, personal, and full of memories. My revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about understanding what kind of person she really was, and making sure everyone else saw it too. And that's where her husband, Tom, came in. Now, Tom had always been a shadowy figure in the HOA ecosystem. He never attended meetings, never replied to emails, but somehow always had his name listed as financial contributor whenever Karen rammed through a new fence code or landscaping restriction. Tom owned a local boat dealership, the same one where Mitchell got a new jet ski 2 weeks after the court ruling. Suspicious, no? A friend of mine from the marina, Mike, a finance guy with a hobby of tracing business records, took one look at Tom's dealership filings and noticed something interesting. A pattern of oddly timed inventory losses coinciding with sudden sales spike. He suspected the books were cooked. He didn't have proof, but he gave me a thread to pull. And I pulled it like a toddler unraveling a Christmas sweater. First, I called a contact in city procurement, someone who helped organize municipal watercraft auctions. Turns out, Tom's dealership had been getting exclusive bids on retired patrol boats and marine equipment. Perfectly legal, unless, say, he was claiming fake losses to reduce taxable income and then reselling government assets for a tidy profit. Then I checked the shipping records tied to my boat. The sale hadn't gone through a typical auction. It had gone directly through a third-party broker linked to a company Tom's dealership subcontracted for international shipments. A company run by Tom's brother-in-law. It was all there. A paper trail so sloppy it looked like Mitchell had filed it himself. I compiled everything into a neat report and emailed it to the local business compliance office with an anonymous tip. I didn't even need to wait long. Within a week, the dealership was under audit. 2 weeks later, Karen's name started getting dropped in interviews. Apparently, she'd helped with some of the internal bookkeeping. Her attempt to flex HOA power had exposed her entire family's operation like mold under a peeled-up floorboard. I thought that would be the knockout punch. But Karen, to her deranged credit, still wasn't done. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find a citation taped to my door. HOA logo. Handwritten in aggressive cursive. Unapproved landscaping alterations in common view. What alteration? A flower box. A literal flower box I'd put on my porch railing 6 months ago that no one had cared about, until now. Attached was a $200 fine and a threat of lien if unpaid within 14 days. Karen had weaponized her last inch of influence. Technically, she'd resigned, but her cronies on the board, mostly folks she'd manipulated over the years, were still loyal enough to rubber stamp whatever petty revenge she drafted. So I fought back. Not with more paperwork. With transparency. I hosted a neighborhood walkthrough. Invited everyone. Made flyers. Offered snacks. We visited my flower box, then visited other properties with actual violations. Broken fences, unmowed lawns, garbage bins visible from the street. Every single one had been overlooked. I printed the violation code on laminated cards and handed them out like party favors. The next board meeting was standing room only. Residents were furious. They didn't care about me. They cared about Karen's abuse of power. About the arbitrary rules. About the selective enforcement. About how their dues were being spent on legal drama instead of playground repairs. One by one, neighbors spoke up. Some even admitted they'd supported Karen out of fear, not respect. By the end of the night, the board had voted to suspend all fines pending an independent review committee. Karen's last grasp at control slipped through her fingers like sand. She finally snapped the following week. Showed up at my door again, mascara already halfway down her cheeks, clutching a folder full of printed emails and crumpled note. She ranted about betrayal. About how she'd built this community. How she gave it order. How I had ruined her family and her future. I listened. Calm. Quiet. Then I said, "You didn't lose because of me, Karen. You lost because you believed you were owed something you never earned." That was the last time she ever came to my property. But the real end? That was still coming. Because just when she thought the storm had passed, the biggest consequence of all was about to dock in her life. And this time, it wasn't a boat. It was federal. And it was wearing suit. 3 weeks passed in a strange lull. Karen vanished from public view, her usual routine of passive-aggressively inspecting neighbors' trash bins and stalking the neighborhood group chat replaced by eerie silence. No HOA memos, no anonymous complaint slips, no sightings of her speed-walking in pastel tracksuits like a desperate mall cop. It was like someone had unplugged the Karen circuit, and honestly, it was kind of relaxing. But I knew better. Karen wasn't the kind of person who surrendered. She was the kind who regrouped. Quiet wasn't peace. Quiet was planning. In that silence, however, something else happened. The community started healing. People actually talked again. Front porches became social zones instead of battle stations. Kids biked freely without parents nervously checking for Karen's SUV. A guy down the street even started building a treehouse, something she'd previously banned for airspace encroachment. We'd survived Hurricane Karen, but everyone knew the aftershocks were still coming. Then, on a Wednesday morning at exactly 8:43 a.m., the aftershock hit. I was drinking coffee in my driveway when the unmarked black SUV rolled in slow, controlled, and final. Not HOA. Not local cops. This had federal written all over it. The doors opened and out stepped 2 men in suit. Clean cut. Clipboard energy. The kind of guys who smell like printer toner and sealed indictments. One of them glanced at my house, then looked at a paper in his hand. They weren't here for me. 3 houses down, Karen's door opened before they even knocked. She'd been watching. Waiting. She stepped out in what she probably thought was a modest, cooperative outfit. Simple blouse, slacks, no jewelry, but the panic in her eyes ruined the whole show. Even from my lawn, I could see her expression morph from forced calm to outright dread as they handed her the papers. Subpoena. It was happening. Word spread faster than fire through a paper factory. By noon, the entire neighborhood was buzzing. Karen had been named in a federal investigation into small business procurement fraud. Apparently, those inventory losses from her husband's dealership weren't just cooking the books, they were laundering assets. Worse, Karen's personal signature had appeared on multiple falsified invoices filed under the dealership's HOA sponsorships. Donations that never happened, repairs that never occurred, equipment that mysteriously went missing and then showed up on Mitchell's Instagram. She wasn't just adjacent to the scam. She was in it. Later that day, Dennis knocked on my door, holding his phone like it was radioactive. "Dude," he whispered, like we were in a spy movie. "They've frozen their accounts. I heard Karen tried to withdraw money this morning, and the bank told her she's flagged." He showed me a screenshot of a local news blurb. It was brief, cautious, but brutal. Federal authorities confirmed ongoing inquiries into a regional boat dealership linked to fraudulent bidding and asset laundering. No charges filed yet, but subpoenas have been served. I leaned against the doorframe and nodded. Tides turning. Over the next few days, Karen imploded. It was like watching a souffle collapse in real time. Her perfect lawn browned at the edges. Her mailbox overflowed. At one point, I saw her in pajamas at 3 p.m., standing on her porch screaming at what appeared to be an empty garden gnome. Whatever carefully curated persona she'd built over the years, queen of the HOA, ruler of regulations, destroyer of daffodils, was crumbling under pressure she couldn't control. But it was Mitchell's reaction that surprised me. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone at the dock, legs dangling over the edge, staring at the water like it owed him an explanation. He looked smaller than I remembered. Less like the cocky kid who'd hijacked my boat, more like someone caught in a grown-up mess way over his head. I thought about walking past, about letting him stew in it, but instead I sat down beside him. He didn't look over. Just muttered, "I didn't know any of it was fake. I just thought, my mom was trying to give me cool stuff." "Cool stuff's expensive," I said. "Consequences are free." He laughed, but it was hollow. "Are you gonna press more charges?" "I could," I said. "But honestly, I think watching your mom lose her empire is punishment enough." He nodded, then finally looked at me. "You think she's going to jail?" "That depends," I said. "If she keeps blaming everyone else? Probably." He didn't say anything for a while. Then, "Thanks for not wrecking my life more than you already could've." I just nodded. I wasn't there to gloat. I was there to see if the cycle had a chance to break. Meanwhile, the HOA board officially opened elections for Karen's now vacant seat. No surprise, Dennis nominated me. "It's symbolic," he said. "The guy who took her down running the board she thought she owned." I declined. I didn't want power. I wanted peace. I told him to nominate someone who actually cared about community, not control. He ended up pushing forward our neighbor Priya, a level-headed nurse who'd once patched up Karen's son after he fell off a golf cart and got a scolding in return. She won by a landslide. But Karen wasn't done, at least not in her own mind. Her final stand came at the next community event, a neighborhood barbecue thrown by the new board to celebrate reconnection. People brought food, set up lawn chairs, kids ran around with bubbles and chalk. It was the most human the neighborhood had felt in years. Karen showed up late, alone, clutching a half-wrapped tray of what looked like lemon squares and a folder in her other hand. The crowd parted around her like oil in water. She walked right up to the info booth, slammed the folder down, and declared loudly, "This is illegal." Everyone froze. Priya calmly looked up and asked, "What is?" Karen yanked open the folder and began rattling off some nonsense about HOA bylaws being ignored, due process being violated, secret meetings being held in violation of Article 4. Classic Karen, clutching outdated rules like they were the Magna Carta. Karen, Priya said gently, you resigned. You were removed by court order. You don't hold any position here anymore. Karen's voice trembled. You don't understand. They're going to take everything. They're going to ruin us. This is all I have left. And for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. Karen wasn't fighting anymore. She was drowning. She didn't care about the bylaws or the barbecue. She just needed one last illusion of control to cling to while her world sank beneath her. She turned to the crowd, eyes wide, mascara streaked. Don't let them erase me, she whispered. I built this place. Someone handed her a napkin. Another gently guided her away. And just like that, Karen exited her kingdom, not in a hail of glory, but in a quiet, pitiful retreat past a cooler full of juice boxes and a folding table of potato salad. But I wasn't watching her anymore. I was watching Mitchell, who stood frozen near the bounce house, arms crossed, face unreadable. He didn't follow her. The wind picked up a little. Kids laughed. Music played again. And I knew the final chapter was coming. Because while Karen was melting down in front of a lemonade stand, her husband had just been formally indicted, and the fallout was going to be the nail in the coffin. Tom's indictment dropped on a Monday morning like thunder cracking over a still lake. I found out the same way half the neighborhood did, via a breaking news alert that pinged everyone's phones during rush hour. The headline was simple but electric. Local boat dealer charged in federal procurement scheme. The subhead? Wife and HOA official under investigation for financial misrepresentation and document fraud. It was surreal. The kind of surreal where you have to read something twice to make sure you're not hallucinating. Karen's entire reign, her castle of printed bylaws and fake authority, had officially collapsed under the weight of real law. The story was all over the local media within hours. News vans rolled down our street like they were hunting for Bigfoot. They parked outside Karen's house, which now looked less like a suburban palace and more like a haunted dollhouse, shades drawn, lawn patchy, mail stuffed in the box like an overfed goose. The indictment itself was damning. It outlined a 5-year scheme involving falsified invoices, ghost employees, and funneling lost inventory into offshore resale channels. Tom had signed the documents, sure, but Karen had notarized a dozen of them. Claimed she was doing clerical help for her husband's business. But the paper trail, the matching handwriting, the backdated HOA filings used as tax write-offs, it painted a different picture. She hadn't just enabled the fraud. She'd helped design it. And now everything was unraveling fast. I was getting texts from people I hadn't spoken to in months. Former board members, ex-neighbors, even one of the marina inspectors who'd once fined me for having my cooler half an inch over regulation size. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Asterisk, did you know it would go this far? Asterisk. No. I didn't. But I hope. Karen didn't leave the house for 3 days after the indictment dropped. On the 4th, a moving truck arrived. Not the sleek, professional kind either. One of those dented, half-painted box trucks that looked like it had previously been used to transport livestock or questionable mattresses. 2 exhausted movers began hauling furniture into it while Karen stood on the porch, arms crossed, barking orders in a tone that had lost its edge. She looked smaller, like someone had deflated her from the inside out. Her blouse was wrinkled, her hair frizzed by humidity and defeat. Mitchell helped too, reluctantly. He wore earbuds and sunglasses, head down, never looking up. At one point he tried to lift a box that was clearly too heavy for him, and instead of helping, Karen screamed at him about spilling important files. I was trimming hedges when I heard it. The sound of someone trying to reassert control over a world that no longer listened. A few neighbors came out and watched from their driveways. No one offered to help. No one said goodbye. It wasn't cruelty. It was closure. That evening, the truck pulled away, and Karen and Mitchell followed in a dusty white Lexus packed with boxes. They didn't wave. She didn't even glance at anyone. Just drove away like she was trying to beat a sunset that no longer cared whether she got there. That should have been the end. But endings are rarely that clean. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter addressed from a law firm in the next city over. Karen's name was on the return address. My stomach tightened before I opened it, bracing for one last tantrum in legal form. But what I found inside caught me off guard. It was an affidavit, a confession. Karen had submitted a sworn statement outlining her role in the HOA mismanagement and her knowledge of the fraudulent business practices. She didn't name me directly, but she admitted to retaliatory actions against a neighbor whose property she had wrongfully seized for personal use. She acknowledged coordinated board manipulation and document falsification under the guise of HOA improvements. She was trying to make a deal. That much was clear. But buried in the second page was something else. A handwritten note, tucked loosely inside the envelope. Just 2 sentences, scribbled in tense cursive that barely held together. I thought control would protect me. You were right. I had no idea what I was doing. That was it. I stood there in my kitchen for a long time, staring at that note. I wasn't sure if it was apology, confession, or absolution. Maybe all 3. Maybe none. But for the first time, Karen's voice didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a person. A broken one. I didn't respond. What would I say? Thanks for finally admitting you nearly destroyed my life over a wake boat and an inferiority complex? There are no neat bows to tie around that kind of chaos. The neighborhood moved on quickly. New elections were held, bylaws updated, the HOA budget unfudged and transparently published on a shared portal. We even had a neighborhood bonfire where people burned old Karen notices for catharsis. Someone brought marshmallows, and someone else brought a blown-up copy of her flower box citation. Dennis grilled hot dogs while Priya passed out reusable HOA contact cards that actually had email addresses. It felt healed. Mitchell didn't come back. Neither did Karen. Word was they relocated to a rental property 2 counties away while Tom waited for trial. Rumor had it Karen applied to work at a local pet supply chain but withdrew after someone recognized her from the news. Fitting. She used to act like she was royalty. Now she couldn't get hired to sell aquarium gravel. As for me, I bought a new boat. Sleeker, faster, a little more expensive, and yes, with GPS so advanced it can text me if it moves without permission. I gave it a new name, too. Had it stenciled on the side in thick silver letters, Neighborhood Watch. Because that's what this all came down to in the end. Not revenge. Not power. But accountability. Watching out for people who think rules only apply to others. And knowing how to hold the line when they come for what's yours. One Saturday, as I was detailing the boat, a kid rode past on his bike and called out, "Is that the one that went to Mexico?" I laughed. "Nope," I said. "That one's got its own passport now." He didn't get it. But someday he will. Because stories like this, they don't just fade. They get passed down like folk tales and folklore. And in our neighborhood, there's a new tradition. When someone tries something shady, someone else just says, "Careful. Don't go full Karen." Everyone knows what it means. And everyone knows what happens when you do.